Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Boshara. I'm the Vice President of the New America Foundation and founded and directed the Assets Program and the Global Assets Project many years ago before moving to St. Louis. And I want to thank you all for coming here today, and want to first of all thank Rita and David and others at the MasterCard Foundation for making this project possible. It's been 3 years in the works with the Consortium. I think we've worked together very well, and it's great to realize this dream of ours as well, to bring this project to reality. The promise is indeed very exciting. So I thought Rita's remarks were right on about the nexus, about the potential, about the importance of providing new kinds of services to youth. Many of you know that there's been a buzz around savings over the last 2 or 3 years in the international development field. For so long, we've heard about microcredit, and I think appropriately. But, you know, the real revolution is a savings revolution going on around the world. But savings, for folks of us in the assets field, really is part of a broader conceptual framework around asset building, which many of you know Michael Sheridan articulated in his 1991 seminal book, Assets and the Poor. You know, when we first rolled out this idea 20 years ago, the question was, can the poor save? And I think through demonstrations and research, we answered that question in the affirmative. Poor people around the world will save. That's not really the key question anymore, although it's still asked and is important. The key question now is, how do they save, and what difference does it make? And when talking about differences, there's really three that we're going to be looking at in this project. The first is sort of the economic and the financial outcomes. Second are the social, psychological, behavioral outcomes associated with asset ownership that are distinct from outcomes associated with income. And then the third outcome, of course, is financial inclusion. When you think about those three outcomes, we have a potential triple win here with this strategy, with this intervention, and I think that's part of why it's particularly exciting to researchers, policymakers, and donors, others who may be invested in this field. So this panel is going to look at the first two outcomes, the financial outcomes and the asset effects in particular, and of course the next panel will be looking at financial inclusion. So I'd like to now introduce our featured speaker for the panel, Michael Sheridan. Many of you, you've already heard about his well-deserved recognition from Time magazine. What Rita did not mention is that he shared a page with Amartya Sen in the actual cover itself, which I think was appropriate, two of the most significant intellectual contributions to development. Rita did not also mention that he was at a posh party at Time magazine a couple nights ago with Prince and Elton John and Sarah Palin and Steve Jobs and others like that. So maybe he'll tell us a little bit about the party too, other than how good Prince was, which I hear he was quite good. Michael, I've had the pleasure and honor of knowing Michael for 20 years now. He's become a dear friend, of course, and he's a faculty member at Washington University in St. Louis at the George Warren Brown School of Social Work, and he founded and directed the Center for Social Development. Michael, as you may know, has inspired savings and asset accumulation policies, programs, and research around the world, and he's been a mentor to me, to many on this panel, and to many people in this room. So I'm deeply honored to introduce my friend and colleague and mentor, Michael Sheridan.
Thank you, Ray. Very generous introduction. I appreciate. It's a great pleasure to be here. This consortium, Rita, thank you for your excellent speech at the beginning, really insightful and made a number of key points. This consortium is really path-breaking study of youth savings around the world and innovations in youth savings and how we might be able to do that better. We're all delighted to have this opportunity, and we thank the MasterCard Foundation for their deep interest and working with us to plan this project. Very constructive project, and I think David Myery should be acknowledged here, an excellent program officer at the MasterCard Foundation who went above and beyond as a program officer, really help us think through what we are able to do with this project. And our good colleagues at New America, Ray and Jamie Zimmerman, we're delighted to be working with you. And at Save the Children, Thierry Van Basteler led the project, and Dasha and Ronnie. I'd like to especially acknowledge Ronnie Deshpande, who guided us here with a steady hand. We're a very diverse, as multidisciplinary, as a good way to phrase it, group, and the planning was just outstanding, and this process has been as good as it could be. And at CGAP, Kate McKee and Margaret Miller have been excellent colleagues. So it's a very diverse consortium, and we look forward to doing this project and learning a lot from it. I'll just make a few comments. Sometimes I tend to make kind of big picture comments because my staff knows I really don't understand the details very, very well. So I will, it's a kind of running joke at CSD, so I will try to make a few big picture comments. You'll get actual information from the remaining panelists here, Gina and Carolina and Ernest, who will fill in more substantive information. Our overall view at the Center for Social Development, our overall emphasis is trying to define and create innovations and then test them in the world. And a large part of that work has been around asset building and asset building innovations. The larger picture view here for this is that we think there's no question that technology really drives economic advancement over the long term, but it's not that simple. Technological innovations are created from if we all the way back to stone tools from our ancestors, not that long ago. But these stone tools, or the needle for sewing clothing, or the domestication of seeds, and every technological innovation from the beginning of the human enterprise has required new forms of social organization. And it's really social and economic organization, and it's really the capacity of this social and economic organization that enables successful implementation of new technologies. In that sense, we're living in a very unique time. It's very clearly the information revolution. We're barely learning about the capacities of what will be possible with the information revolution. It will be necessary, and we can see this in financial services, it will be necessary to create new social and economic organizations that respond to the capacities that are available with information technology. So, and increasingly we see this in financial services with uses of telecommunications and information technology in many kinds of ways to reach more people in the world. But in order to do that, the financial service organizations and the governments and public policies and the regulatory environment and so many things that have to do with how people organize themselves will be essential to respond effectively to the potential of this technology. I think that if I can think about savings and asset building in a kind of broad sense, there are key moments in history where large social innovations occur, social and economic innovations. We can think about, the classic ones of democracy emerging from 5th century BC Athens. Actually, I think there were precursors to democracy before, and this is a very Western-centric view, but we view this as a kind of opening up of voice in the world to a new kind of social and political organization that allows people to participate. And the wisdom of it is that you begin to take advantage of the capacity of all in more democratic organization. And maybe at least as important, democracy is a messy business and makes lots of mistakes, but what democracy does is tends to prevent societies from making really big mistakes. This is Ray was kind enough to put me on the same page with Amartya Sen in his introduction, a much smarter man than I am. But one of Amartya Sen's great observations and great studies was that in democratic societies, famines tend not to occur. A really brilliant paper and brilliant insight. So that democracy might be kind of messy. We make all kinds of mistakes, but we avoid the really big mistakes, because when it comes down to it, people will vote out a regime that makes really big mistakes. So in the same way, if I can use this analogy and this same hope, really, I think we're at the beginning of opening up capital holding or asset building for the whole world. That the idea that people should have some resources in the world is a revolutionary idea in many ways. And I don't necessarily mean that in a kind of Marxist sense, although I think Marx had some great insights about that. This isn't a radical political statement. It's a statement about how to take advantage of the capacities of all people. And people will do better if they have a little bit of resources so they can invest in their lives and plan ahead and help their children get an education and improve their lives over time. And we need this. There's lots and lots of statistics in the world that once people do better economically, then they start to do better socially and as better members of the community in many kinds of ways. So we need the capacities of all people in both a political and an economic sense, and we think that savings and asset building for a population is one way to begin to develop this capacity. It would be I don't want to put this in the sort of same category of the creation of democracy, but I think it is a substantially different way to think about the capacities of humans that we haven't really thought about before in the same systematic way. So the world has big problems to solve. We need everybody to be engaged in solving them, and saving and asset building for the whole population can be a part of that picture. If people have, and this gets to the effects of savings and asset holding, if people have some modest resources, they can invest in their education, and we're going to actually test these ideas. So a big part of the project for the YouthSave Consortium is to test and systematically test whether and how and for whom and under what circumstances these positive effects might occur. And we expect that we might find these positive effects not only in the financial life and the financial relationships of the young people, and they'll be transitioning, some of them transitioning out of youth into young adulthood during this project. We'll find this in their financial lives. We hope to see it in their economic life, that they're economically in a better position. We anticipate that there will be positive educational impacts. All of these are subject to test. I'm talking to you now with my research hat. These are hypotheses that the YouthSave Consortium will have, that they will do better in their educational achievement, and eventually in their position in the labor market, or if not in the paid labor market, in the creation of their own livelihoods. As Rita mentioned, 1 billion new jobs to create over the next decade is a daunting figure, and many young people are going to have to be very creative and need every possible resource and support to be able to find a position where they can generate a livelihood for themselves. And the YouthSave Consortium will be aiming to try to improve that and to document it. We also hope to see young people, some kind of longer range hypotheses that young people will have resources and take better care of themselves and be able to invest in their health. So we anticipate differences in their outlook for their own future, their own behaviors in health, particularly in countries with high HIV levels. We'll be very interested in testing whether young people have a different view of their future, and if they have a different view of their sexual behavior and their safe sexual behavior because of that, and eventually their long-term health. So we're also interested in these questions, and we're interested in the questions of not just their personal development, but their relationship with their family and the household development, and whether or not as they develop some resources and some ability to control their own future, whether or not this affects eventually their communities as well. So there's a lot of very large questions on the table. This project, as someone brought up this morning in discussions, that 5 years really isn't a very long time. It will be a substantial period of time, but we're hoping even that someone will be able to follow these kids, especially where we have experimental conditions established with treatment, randomly assigned treatment and controls. So someone will be able to follow these participants longer term to see how they do when they become adults and form their own households and raise their own children. There's a couple of statistics in social sciences. If you're looking at intergenerational issues in social sciences, there's some pretty powerful statistics that parents' asset levels and net worth tends to transition very positively to youth or the next generation. Also, and even stronger in some cases, the parents' educational level tends to transition very strongly to youth. So we anticipate these positive effects in this study, and then we would expect long term that the children of these young people will also do better. There won't be, this project's not designed to test that, but that's the long-term hypothesis. So I just want to say again that it's a delight to be able to ask these questions and to be able to do it in a very systematic way. Not every foundation believes in research as deeply as the MasterCard Foundation, and we think this commitment to learning a lot from this project will have very big payoffs. Just one comment going forward, the MasterCard Foundation also very committed to working in country with research partners. So we have great research partners in all 4 countries that are targeted by the YouthSave Consortium. We'll be working with them as true partners. They're not just there collecting the data, they are research partners, and they will co-analyze and co-publish all of the studies with us. Again, this is not always the case. It's rather uncommon that this kind of pattern occurs, and we do this because along with the MasterCard Foundation, we have a strong interest in building the capacity for better research in country, and we have a strong interest in learning from the people in country so that we all build capacities in both directions. So I want to thank everyone again, and I will sit down and listen to the responses from the panel. Thank you very much.
Those were great comments, Michael. Thank you very much. I should just point out that it was Time Magazine and not me who decided to put Sen and Sheridan. And then, you know, I just was reflecting the fact that they had done that, although I would have done it anyway. But interestingly, you know, if you've read Sen's book, Development is Freedom, he talks a lot about capabilities, but he doesn't really say how to measure those or what those are. And I've often thought that assets serve as a good proxy for Sen's notion of capabilities. And I think this project potentially makes a really valuable contribution to that construct. So maybe that's one of the papers we can write at the end of this session. We have 3 very distinguished researchers as respondents today, and they are going to comment on Michael's remarks, but they also are going to offer their own observations stemming from their years of research in the savings and development fields. So we have 3 today, and I think we'll take them in the order that they're sitting, if that's okay. Gina Choa is an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill, and her research interests span the U.S. and worldwide. She studied behavior among teens. She's looked at microenterprise in Africa, labor outcomes in the U.S., a whole range of things. And she wrote a paper recently summarizing child well-being asset effects in developing countries. After Gina, we will hear from Carolina Travelli, who's a senior researcher at the Institute for Peruvian Studies. And Carolina is really one of the premier researchers in Latin America, pioneering all kinds of research around savings and assets and other new ideas in the developing world. And Ernest Arriete is the director of the Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution. His particular expertise is in development economics, and has particular interest in the role of institutions in helping families move forward. So I understand they've been each given approximately 8 minutes to provide their comments. We'll do them 1, 2, 3. and then we will open up the panel for Q&A. So you are free to speak from the panel or come up here, whichever you prefer. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. So I will give details, since Michael is the high-level deliverer of asset effects. I will give the details of the evidence that is available on asset effects. So when we look at youth development, as Rita rightly pointed, one of the central issues is the transition that youth engage in, for example, from school to work or childhood to adulthood. But in developing countries, this takes a different form. So there's the premature exit from the trajectory of school to work, which might result in child labor. And then there's also the trajectory of childhood to adulthood, which might also prematurely get children in marriages, and so they have to think about health, reproductive health, sexual behaviors, and a whole spectrum of things that are impacted by engaging in marriage, for example. And so the evidence that is available in developing countries of asset effects, I'll start with child labor, is mixed, but overall there's a positive impact that assets reduce child labor. And then if you look at sexual behavior, Fred Sawamala has looked at this, and assets reduce risky sexual behavior amongst youth. And then there's an increase in access to healthcare. So those families that have access, assets, their access to healthcare is increased because they have the resources to be able to pay for healthcare. And then if you look at HIV positive people who are living with HIV, who are living with AIDS, assets improve their adherence to ARVs. And this is new evidence that is coming out of Zambia, Malawi, and South Africa. On schooling, including school enrollment, school attendance, school performance, assets will increase school enrollment, it will increase school attendance, and school performance. So in the short term, youth do well in school because their parents have the financial resources to respond to needs of maybe buying books or buying uniform or paying for school fees. In the long term, when youth know that their parents have assets, they are able to perform better in school. They apply themselves even more because they know that they will be able to transition to higher level education. However, we know that youth are a heterogeneous population. So when you look at youth in developing countries, you're not just thinking about youth who are in school. You're also thinking about a 19-year-old mother with 3 children running a business to be able to take care of the children. And so how do we, as for example, YouthSave, the YouthSave project, how do we respond to the needs of these different types of youth? How do we go in and provide products that will make sense to these youth? And what are the impacts of these assets on these different youth? And so, for example, in the work that we've done in Assets Africa in Uganda, assets took a form of livelihoods. So we had productive assets that youth bought. And the impacts that we have found in that project are that financial assets increased, total wealth increased, so productive assets plus financial assets increased for those who were in the intervention, and the net worth increased as well. There was difference between the comparison and the intervention group. And what I should mention is it's very difficult to get at net worth, especially in these populations, because income is something that is secret. Okay, you don't just tell people what your wealth is, how much income you earn. So it was very difficult to get at this, but it was exciting to find these positive results. So some of the research questions that I think should be asked moving forward. One is who saves? I think Ray also alluded to this. Who saves? Why do they save? And where do they save? And then, how do family and social networks shape saving patterns for youth? What are the key barriers, incentives, risks for young people engaging in savings? How do savings patterns differ for young men and women? So, are there gender differentials in the way that parents invest in women, young women versus young men? And does there seem to be a convergence of sustainable differences in behaviors by gender over time in different parts of the globe? Thank you.
Very good on your time, too.
Great, thank you. I'll just make like 3 points in my 8 minutes. I hope I can do that. The first one adds on what Gina was saying about heterogeneity among the youth people. I think young fellows are not only different in their needs, depending on the age and the life cycle where they are, but also within the economic opportunities they face in each of different developing countries. It's quite different, young people in the rural areas than in the urban areas, females and males, younger fellows than older fellows, and the need they have to create their own livelihood strategies are quite different depending on all these variables and some other risk they face. And that is why I think that putting the effort in promoting savings accounts for these fellows it's a perfect match with this heterogeneity, because if you create a financial asset like savings, you are able to convert that asset in anything you need, actually. And we really don't know from outside the young fellow's mind, his household, his opportunities, what they really need. What's the most valuable asset they need to trigger a development opportunity for them? So financial assets and savings in particular are like a joker in a card game. You know, you can use it to become anything you really need. So that feels a very important gap, because most of the public policies in developing countries are completely tied to offering just one type of asset to the young people or to the poor people. And that asset may not be the valuable one, or not be the one that it's really making the difference and breaking the constraints these people are facing. So I think in that sense, we have a lot of research questions around how is this process of defining what's the asset, the most valuable asset to break the constraints faced by young fellows, and how this financial inclusion process and building a financial asset through savings accounts could be the tool to create this required asset to move into a better livelihood strategy. The second point has to do with the conventional wisdom that young fellows and poor people don't use financial assets because they don't have enough supply. They don't have access. There's no supply available. And that's something that's quite important in this initiative, is that as they are working with the young fellows needing these services, they are also working with the intermediaries to create the right products to offer access to the financial system. And that is not as simple as it looks. It's not just opening a branch of a bank in a very, very far away town to make rural people to get financial services. It takes a lot more. You need a very good product design. You need this product to be profitable for the intermediary. If not, it won't last forever. And you need this product to be able really to match the demand. And the demand is not that if you go and offer microcredit or savings accounts or a payment system, the people will just use it because they did not have it before. Now they have it, they will use it. There are demand constraints that need to be faced from the understanding of the complex life of these young fellows. And the third point that I need is quite important is that the whole strategy of this consortium is looking how these financial assets and the savings account could help the improvement and the selection of a better livelihood strategy to obtain better jobs, better education, better health. And those are very prospective things that are crucial in order to achieve development from these potential financial clients as being the young fellows. But also we need to see the other side. Financial assets and savings accounts in particular are crucial to provide a tool for young people to manage the vulnerability they face. And that is a very, very important issue because most of these people, when engaging in a new economic opportunity that brings them more income or more assets, they face a lot of risk and they don't have strategies to manage risk. And if we don't provide them with tools to protect the assets they are hardly gaining and the new incomes they are generating, they will come back to a very, very poor position. And it takes a longer way to go up than to go down in the poverty line issue. So I think dealing with vulnerability and also looking at the financial assets and the savings accounts as a way of protecting the assets and the economic opportunities gained by young fellows, it's also very, very, very significant thing that we need to take into account, because it's not only how many young fellows could move ahead, but how many are not coming back to a poor position. And the last thing I would say is that financial assets and savings accounts are the opening door to the use of a transactional platform within the financial system. And this could not be translated directly into assets, but could make life a lot more easier for the poor people and for the young fellows. Technology is helping us a lot to do that with very low transaction cost. So we need to also really understand how this use of transactional activities within the financial sector could be an developing opportunity for the young fellows within these very heterogeneous ways of life they are discovering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me make a few comments based on my experience of the way youth would interact with savings institutions in developing countries. The first point I'd like to make here is basically that I agree with everything that has been said by all the panelists, because those experiences reflect also in the work that I've done over the years. The first point I'd like to make is with reference to the choice of financial assets in developing countries. Indeed, one of the things I observed in my last major work on asset holding in Ghana, using a very large data set, was the fact that in almost all households, wealthy or not so wealthy, you would find significant asset holding. That's a point that we've made in a number of publications. You will find significant asset holding. And this will cut across all the different income quintiles in the household. That's important. But when they begin to look at the type of assets that they hold, then you'll find that financial assets are probably the least exciting to all households. Financial assets begin to show only in the highest income quintile. For all the lower 4 quintiles, financial assets do not feature much. You can do that for gender, you can do that by urban and rural groups, you can do that by different age groups. Financial assets do not feature much. What it tells me clearly is that income does play a very important role in the choices that households make, whether they live in rural areas or in urban areas, whether they are men or women, whether they are young or old. They play a very important role. So the challenge is, how do we get these incomes to rise significantly enough to make households choose financial assets? That is a very important question. We cannot pretend that income is not important. And I know that in some of the literature, particularly in the last 10 years, we've pretended that the poor can save. Yes, they can save, but in forms that are not of their choice. And that's a very important lesson that I hope we can think about. Now, if income is important, what can we do about it? Rita made mention of the fact that unemployment is very, very high in many developing countries. Whether you look at South Africa, you look at Ghana, you look at Tanzania, Kenya, unemployment in our countries is quite high. And it's even more so for younger people. In my country, Ghana, people aged between 15 and 29 come close to about 40% of the population. And yet they are over 60% of the entire unemployed, the labor force. So unemployment among the youth is much more important considering everything. So if unemployment among the youth is so huge in various countries, I gave the Ghana figures, but it's very much the same for most African countries. What can we do about it? I come from a country where in every budget that is read, government talks about creating a certain number of jobs, and yet nobody holds the government to account. The last government that we had promised, for being elected, to create 1 million jobs. At the end of 8 years, nobody could talk about the number of jobs that have been created. When you look around Africa today, you will find various initiatives, whether it's in Uganda, in Senegal, in Ghana. You find various initiatives being put in place by governments to create employment. Most of these are focused on public works. So like you have the National Youth Employment Program in Ghana, which seeks to, by use of public works, occupy young people and keep them away from the streets where they will be selling various things. You find similar things in Uganda, you find similar things in Kenya, in Senegal, even in Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria. Governments have come to believe that they have to do something about employment. And the one thing that they can easily do is borrow money from international sources, or if possible, raise tax income, and then use that to create public works. In my view, these may be useful for those young people for a certain number of years, but are not sustainable. You can't sustain these public works things. And the main reason why the young people are not employed is because, one, they don't have skills. They don't have skills. In Ghana, if you go to a basic school, a primary school, spending 6 years there, at the end of it, you take the basic education certificate examination. About 72% of the kids that take that examination will not find a place in a senior secondary school. In the past, if you didn't find a place in a senior secondary school, you probably go into apprenticeship, which is very informally organized. Today, there is no properly organized apprenticeship system. So for those who go to senior secondary school, which is about the only 38% of the 20% of the school-going kids, after 3 years of junior secondary education, only 50% of them will end up in a senior secondary school. The others will again be dropping from the junior school system. And then of those who go to the senior secondary school, only 28% will find themselves in a university. What it means is that all these kids who drop from the system as they progress will have to find some non-school-based system to give them skills. And most African countries don't have any of those. They don't have any of those, so the only way you acquire skills is to go through the school system. First the primary, then the junior secondary, the senior secondary, and then tertiary. Outside of these, there's nothing that will give you in a very systematic way skills. And so if you don't acquire those skills, no employer needs you. And those employers that will take you probably will spend a lot more trying to give you some of the job skills. And that's very, very costly. So in the end, many of these young people will end up on the streets of Accra, Lagos, Kampala, wherever, trying to make a living. Now, for these people, it is extremely difficult to find any significant savings, largely because they struggle to earn something to buy food for the day. They struggle to earn something to buy clothes for themselves and look after, if they are girls, probably look after children. If they are boys, probably think about sending money to their parents back in their villages. It's extremely difficult. One of the things we've said to governments in Africa, instead of focusing entirely on public works, the way to create jobs for young people, let's begin to think in a much more structured way about how you can think of employment creation, linking that to the future of the economy itself. Many of these economies have one very basic structure, largely producing low-value agricultural commodities or minerals. How do you want the future of this economy to be tied to the types of jobs that young people can perform? One of the things I propose to the government in Ghana is to decentralize the whole idea of creating jobs. In Ghana, we have about 178 different districts. These are the local government bodies. And each of these 178 districts, population average about 200,000. And the number of young people between 15 and 29 will be about, they will be about 42% of the population. And of this 42%, about 13% are unemployed. Roughly, you are looking at creating jobs for about 3,000 people in the district every year. You can't do it centrally. You can't be from the national capital creating 3,000 jobs every year. But you can, easily working with the district assembly, create up to about 2,000 jobs every year by creating what we call the Business Development Center, which is basically a private-public partnership that brings young people together in about 3 or 4 towns in the district, where young people are given formal training in various crafts, producing things that you can export, producing things that are in demand outside of the district, outside of the country, whether it's in agriculture or in manufacturing. And they are given skills by the private sector, well-established private sector. They are introduced to new technologies. They are brought up to speed on various new ideas in the world and given entrepreneurship skills as well as various skills linked to whatever profession they are interested in. That way, by linking the rural bank, in Ghana, every district has what we call a rural bank, where the rural bank is partly owned by the central bank and partly owned by the private sector. You can do that. So by using the capital of the private sector, provide this kind of training. And after giving these young people skills, they are then employed within the BDC, the Business Development Center, for about 3 or 4 years. By the time they leave, they would have enhanced their own asset holding. They would have some financial savings. They would be in a position where they can either be hired by a larger urban establishment or be in a position to go into their own self-employment. They will have skills. And that is the difference between the young person of today and the young person of, let's say, 5 years from now, if we were to follow this. Other than that, I can't see how governments in Africa can constantly provide public works as a means to occupy young people. They will be employed for brief periods. They would earn income for brief periods, but this would collapse because the governments will not be able to finance that. My government borrowed $110 million to do this with the NYEP. I can't see that being sustained. And clearly, the situation in Greece today shows us how difficult it is for governments to finance their deficits simply by borrowing. And I do hope that as we think about youth savings, we will think much more creatively, innovatively, how governments can create employment and sustain these through skills provision. Thank you very much.
This is the most impressive panel I've ever moderated in terms of coming under time, and it's really remarkable, which is great for all of us. We have more time for Q&A. So, Michael, I'd like to give you the first opportunity to respond, if you'd like, to their comments.
Good, Ray. I'll ask one question of each panelist, and then after that we'll open up. Really excellent remarks. I appreciate them very much. Gina, you emphasized, among other things, that the reduction of the potential reduction of negatives if young people have some saving. You mentioned reducing child labor, perhaps, reducing pregnancy and marriage, early pregnancy and marriage for girls, perhaps preventing HIV infection. So the question I have is, how are these negatives reduced, and what's the pathway for that? What do you anticipate, and how, if at all, is this linked to some of what we have talked about as potential positives of having these accounts? Should I ask all these questions and everyone can think ahead? Okay, so Carolina, you emphasize risk and protection of assets, and I think that's a very insightful comment. And you're very eloquent in stating it. That can fall back much more quickly than can build up assets. But the question I have is, imagine young people do have more accounts and are saving, or their families are helping them save. What's the form of these protections? What is really likely to be successful, and what tools do we have to do that? And Ernest, the question I had, I thought your comments very insightful, and I think no one in the room will disagree with you that income is fundamental, and employment is critical for income, and it's really essential for sustaining young people in the future and enabling them to be successful as adults. The question I have is a little bit prior to the solution you were suggesting, which is, why is it what's creating the high levels of dropouts before young people get to secondary schooling, and even after they get to secondary schooling, and is there what strategies would improve these graduation rates, because this structure exists and is being obviously underutilized? So those are my three questions.
I hope I can remember what you asked. You said how are the assets?
Yeah, you emphasized very insightfully that having an account may actually not just lead to positive outcomes, but could reduce some negative outcomes. You talked about child labor and reducing early pregnancy and marriage for girls, and perhaps health behaviors as well. So how does this happen?
So you're asking about the pathways.
Yeah.
Of. I think that I wouldn't advocate a linear pathway. I would talk about feedback loops. And so I'm thinking the ownership of assets change outlook on life. And that would result in reduction of all these things. So some of the studies that have been published, because of the assets that people have within their households, they are able to send kids to school and hold back on involving them in home work, like household work. So if they have land and they are tilling that land for harvesting crops, instead of using the children to be involved in that work, they are able to send them to school. But the evidence there is very mixed, because in some countries, actually assets increase child labor, in the sense that if you have cattle in rural Zambia, for example, the children are involved in herding those cattle. And so instead of going to school, they engage in herding cattle. But overall, that's why I said overall, having assets within the household, substantial assets, would free up time for the children to be able to go to school and engage in school, so that they follow that trajectory of school to work. But obviously, what NS said just now puts a different twist on that, because if you have the schooling, you have the skills, but there's no employment, then that's a different thing. So that would be the pathway where the households have assets and they can be able to provide for the children to engage in school and prepare them for adulthood.
Okay, you have a big question for myself, but I work mostly in the rural areas, so I will use some examples from the rural areas to illustrate how having a savings account or being included in the financial system could be the opening of a new toolbox for protecting assets and economic opportunities for the poor and for the young fellows. The first one is the microinsurance business is growing very fast, but the main problem they are facing is how to reach the clients, because it's very expensive. You cannot create a selling system to deliver a microinsurance product that costs $10 a year. It's too expensive just to reach the clients, to give the form, to have the signature form. And being related with the financial system solves that problem immediately. And now with new technology also, it makes it even cheaper. So there's a great opportunity to get into the insurance market altogether with the financial services. And that makes a big deal of risk management. However, for example, also one big problem for new businesses is seasonality of the incomes derived from that business. And having a savings account can solve that problem of how to not only smooth consumption, but also to really use wisely and save some resources to reinvest in the next economic opportunity for that highly seasonal business. And those are the first businesses that most poor people and young fellows get engaged, because there's just one-time opportunity. The other thing is when you get a big hit, a big shock. You know, if you are included in the financial system, and although you don't have a lot of money in your saving account, but you've been using your saving account, you get very, very easily access to a credit, to a microcredit, to a consumption credit, to an emergency credit. And that makes a big difference between becoming poor or just sharing the cost of the shock in the future, for the future. So that's another very important feature of this financial inclusion. The other thing that we've learned a lot, I work in a project promoting the savings accounts used for women receiving the conditional cash transfer programs in Latin America. And what we learned from these women is that a very important thing to manage risk and to prevent shocks using the savings account is that you can anticipate some events that will probably happen. If there's a very bad weather year coming, you can anticipate that. And you can save small amounts of money in your account to be prepared for that shock. So that's another way to manage risk. And the last one that it's very important is that if you have some financial assets in your account, those are completely divisible. It's different from having a cow. When you have an emergency, you cannot just sell a portion of your cow. So that's something that looks minor, but it's quite important for people and to protect the quality of the assets they have. So it's I think there are many other examples that we could talk about, but I think protecting the assets through promoting financial inclusion is one of the main features and one of the more impact things that we will see in this project.
Thank you, Carolina. Ernest.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question of what is creating this very high dropout rate among young people. The first reason that we can associate with this is the one of very poor educational planning, in the sense that Ghana has invested quite a bit in the last 2 decades to improve the number of education institutions available. So with a lot of help from the World Bank, for example, the number of schools available at the basic level has increased by more than 400% over that period. Today, in every district, in every village, available school places has increased considerably. The whole idea being to ensure that every child goes to school, which is definitely very much acceptable. That's the kind of thing that every government should pursue. But when you do that, you also have to think about, now, what do they do when they leave school? And that's where there's no planning of, yes, we want the kids in school, but we don't think clearly about what do they do when they leave school. So because we don't think about it, we don't invest much in the things that those kids will be doing when they leave school. Before the reforms of the 80s, those kids who left the schools and didn't find places in secondary schools would have found themselves informally being trained, being given apprenticeships, being sent to vocational schools, and all of these were privately organized. Today, there are very, very few opportunities for doing those things, managing these things privately, because these kids are coming. The state is not providing any support to those who would run vocational institutions, for example. And so if the kids don't find any places in the secondary schools, they are lost, because nobody is going to provide them with vocational training. And the state doesn't organize in any serious way vocational training. So those kids will then find themselves in, a few of them will find themselves doing apprenticeships. One study that we did back in '87 showed that for things like becoming an auto mechanic, which previously would have taken you about 18 months through apprenticeship, and after that you went on and worked with a car repair firm. Apprentices stayed with their masters for about 4 years, 2.5 years longer than required. Why? Nobody was in a hurry. The apprentice was not in a hurry to leave the shop, because if he left, there was no job anyway. And the master was not in a hurry to let him go, because if he left, he would have to find a new set of apprentices. Since they were there as apprentices, he didn't have to pay them any wages. So it had become the quasi form of holding on to people when there were no jobs. The state hasn't quite figured out exactly what to do about this group of people. The numbers are growing, but the state knows how to manage people in schools, but doesn't know what to do to them when they're out of school. And nobody is thinking in a very structured way of how to deal with that problem. And I believe that for many developing countries, especially in Africa, the non-school form of training, the non-school form of skills provision is where they really have to pay a lot of attention, but they're not doing it. Because they don't have people who have been trained to think about that, and also to work with the private sector to deal with it in a very structured way. And that's where I think the biggest problem is.
Thank you. That's great. So I have a few comments and questions, but I'm eager to hear what you all have to say. So please remember to wait for the microphone, identify yourself, and please try to keep your comments and questions to the point. Thank you. In the back, please. Yes.
Hi, Glenn Wesley from CGAP. Just a question for Ernest. You had mentioned that the poor, the bottom 4/5 of the population don't save very much, and it's time to stop pretending they do. I understand that, I guess, as a statement about total savings, but I wondered, as a fraction of their income, if that's still true, either savings or financial assets as a percentage of their income. I had the impression that that was significant amongst the poor.
Please.
Sure. The point I made was that the poor will have assets, and these assets can be counted as part of their savings. But they are holding of financial assets, and that's where the difficulty is. If you qualify or define savings to be only the financial assets, then clearly they are not saving much. If you define savings to include all their other assets, including the non-financial ones, yes, then you can say that the poor do save. But I worry about the approaches I've seen, especially with some of the NGOs, where we equate the savings with everything that they have, and then based on that, proceed to make loans to them or proceed to support various things. And the determination of interest rates being driven by what we perceive to be the value of their assets. And I've seen poor households being strangled effectively with very, very high interest rates on loans they've taken, based on the premise that the poor can save, the poor can borrow, and the poor can repay. I have difficulty with a lot of that. A poor household is a poor household, and a poor household may have some goods, they may have some non-farm equipment, may have one or two other household items that we see as part of their asset holding. It doesn't, in my view, make it easy for them to repay large loans, whatever loans they've taken. It doesn't, in my view, give them the kind of options that a household with higher incomes can have. And that's where I think the tension is. What can the poor do? The poor can do many things, but repaying interest, high interest or commercial interest rate is very difficult for many of the poor that I've studied.
Yes, please hang on for the mic.
Hello? Yeah. Church and freelance correspondent, Mr. Michael Sheridan. From your short speech, we can see you are really a humble person and a real human being. And from your question, I think you get to the point. So I think the project in your leadership should be very well. And my question is this: I don't know whom I should ask, but I just say it, and whoever can answer the question, answer it. I'm going to do a more practical thing. The thing is this: how do you tell kids or the parent to manage the account, and who really owns the account? Is the kid or the parent? And what kind of incentive you let them handle their account well? When they handle well, what's going to happen? And when they handle badly, what's going to happen? Thank you.
I will answer, but my colleagues on the financial services side will do a better job of this. So the next panel actually can address this question better. But I think the who owns the account, of course, is a very critical question. It varies from country to country. So in some countries, children and youth are able to own accounts, and some countries they are not. This is directly. This is actually true in the United States. Varies across states also. So the answer is it depends. There is some reason to believe, however, that a savings account that's in a child's name, that's dedicated to a child, will have a positive effect whether that child owns it or not. It doesn't, however, completely answer the protection of these funds, and this is back to one of the protection questions that Carolina has brought up. It could be that savings accumulate in an account for a young person, and the parents fall on hard times or decide that they need to go on a trip or something, and maybe actually need the money or discretionarily take the money, so young person will not be protected. So there are big issues in terms of protecting the funds for the young person, especially in very complicated and impoverished family context where the family might really need the money, and these are not easy questions to answer. In terms of managing the account well or not so well, this has its own consequences. If it's managed badly, then it doesn't accumulate assets. If it's managed better, it accumulates. We don't really have an incentive structure in place beyond that. I don't think the project envisions that. Like the rest of us, saving and asset accumulation will provide its own reward.
Yes.
My name's Anita Campion from AZMJ. It's good to see all of you, and it's been really interesting. I've actually found very similar findings to what Gina was saying in some research we did in Eastern Congo. And that project in particular had a combination of savings mobilization as well as non-financial services. And I'm wondering if you all are looking at kind of the possible implications for non-financial services influencing results, separating that out, if we're really looking at just savings, because I kind of assumed in our project that the technical assistance was a large part of the results. The other thing I was curious to know is if you found any negative impacts on savings. For example, I've heard, I think it was in Kenya, some young women, as their families found out that they had savings, would put pressure on them to use them in ways they didn't want to use. So curious if you found any other things like that. And then finally, I'd be really interested in knowing the regional differences that you're seeing as you're working on these different countries. Thanks.
The research question.
I don't know. Answering all the questions. Don't be shy, panelists.
I'll call on them.
Okay. It's a great question about non-financial services, and there may be an opportunity to offer non-financial services in combination with this. We haven't. The actual package of delivery is still to be worked out with the financial provider in each country, and with Save the Children, which is overseeing the delivery of the whole YouthSave initiative in country. So it could be, for example, that there is some kind of financial education component or other ancillary service, and if so, we will take that into consideration and test for that. It's really a little bit up in the air. We do know from other research that, for example, financial education is likely to have a positive effect on how young people do in an account like this. So there is reason to believe that such services might be positive. On the other hand, one of the goals of this project is creating products and services that can be expanded and are sustainable over the long term. So the extent to which these services have costs raises questions about sustainability. The usual trade-off.
Just in a general sense, I would add that, as I mentioned before, how the poor save has become a very interesting question, and I think in some of the U.S. experiments, which I think has been corroborated around the world, it turns out that individual characteristics, whether you're black or white or female or poor or relatively well-off poor, these individual characteristics seem to matter little in predicting savings, but program characteristics seem to matter a lot. And there's a wide range of program characteristics that seem to predict savings. And so, we're going to be looking at both the program and the individual characteristics that predict savings in this project. Okay, let's see. David, and then we'll go to the back.
Thank you. I'm David Myrie from the MasterCard Foundation. I wanted to pick up on the Joker. Carolina, you mentioned this idea that there's a great deal of heterogeneity amongst the youth population. It was a conversation that a group of us were having earlier in the day. And that one of the advantages of financial assets is that they are like the Joker. They can be converted so easily to other things. But I'd like to unpack that and maybe ask other members of the panel to pack it, because I do think it's an interesting idea. One of the challenges for any kind of program dealing with helping youth build their assets and to find their place in the world is, we don't want them all doing the same thing. So skills training programs, for example, are too often also part of the problem is they all train them for the same skills, and then there's too many people with the same skills seeking to do things. And so we also have financial assets. We have just one kind of financial asset. There could be some risks with that. So you're talking about something where you convert the financial asset to other assets. So I'd like to ask a little bit more about how you would see that working in a way that would empower youth to develop their skills and pursue other kinds of livelihood strategies. What are the pros and the cons of that? What should we be looking at? Let's unpack the Joker a little bit, please.
Your card.
Okay, I'll just say that the idea of playing with the Joker image is quite important, because most of the market and economic opportunities faced by poor people and by younger fellows entering the job market or the micro-entrepreneurial market is that the markets they face are very tiny markets, and they get saturated immediately. So they need to be very creative, and the more they get into this market, they get new ideas, and people is so creative all around the world. And what we've seen is that young people and women in the project I'm working in have so many new ideas just being part of the market, but they always need something different, and the need they have changes over time. So that's why this idea of the Joker is so powerful within providing the type of asset they could really change over time and adapt to different economic opportunities they are facing in that precise moment of time. Because this is a very dynamic issue also. It's not something that you accumulate some assets in your savings account, then you traduce that into a juice machine and sell juice forever. What we've learned is that all those small businesses change very quickly. They have a living period and they die, they go bankrupt, or they just move to another because there's another economic opportunity. And then all the management of that and all the conversions you need, it's not just one point in time only. It's several moments in the life of the productive business or the economic opportunities they face where you need these conversions. So that's why I think this is a very powerful idea, but I think I'll need the other ones to comment on that, because it's an open question, I think.
I think I agree with you completely that there's a need to unpack this whole question of financial assets. One of the things we haven't done well, I believe, in the last 2 decades is allow the innovativeness and creativity of people in various developing countries to find expression in new forms of financial instruments. So in many of our countries, we have developed very new financial instruments which have been sold to the public, but sold only to a small section of the public. Before many of these instruments became available, most of the financial assets of the people in these countries were held informally. So informal financial assets were quite significant in many of the surveys that we did back in the 80s and 70s. Today, we have completely disregarded that huge informal financial sector and developed only the formal, and ignored also the link between the informal and the formal. Now, many of the people that we are talking about here, young unemployed, underemployed, they thrive in the informal sector. And yet, we do not support that informal financial sector. We have focused quite a bit on the informal real sector, but not at all on the informal sector, financial sector. And that is where I believe the biggest disservice to the creativity and innovativeness of poor countries and poor societies has really emerged. A lot of the things that I see in terms of transfer of remittances, for example, could have found very, very good expression in the informal financial sector. And we haven't paid enough attention to that. We haven't encouraged the mobile bankers, for example, in West Africa to thrive and take advantage of this boom in remittances. We haven't, in the development of microfinance, sought how best we can link up with the informal sector. We haven't. We have operated as if the informal financial sector would disappear. And because we haven't paid enough attention to informal finance, that's why we haven't helped people who earn their income in the informal sector to then develop new financial assets that are coming out of the informal sector. And I believe that it's not too late. It can be done. It can be done, but we have to sort of rethink how we relate to people in that area. I agree with you that we need to unpack the financial assets, but we need to give expression to the innovativeness and the creativity of people who obtain their livelihoods from the informal sector.
I think it's worth mentioning some research that Tom Shapiro did a few years ago. Basically, he found that small amounts of assets at the right time in somebody's life can have a transformative effect, and that was his word, on the life course. So it's really important to have those assets for when those moments come along. Okay, question in the back. Behind you, Lindsay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Fiona McCauley with Making Sense International. The Youth Inclusive Financial Services Program that we're leading, as part of that, we are talking to youth-serving organizations and to microfinance institutions to understand what the sound practices are that they are engaging in that could be shared with others interested in linking young people to financial services. And as part of that, we're bringing MFIs and youth-serving organizations together in dialogue. Something that very interesting that came out in some dialogue between an MFI in the West Bank and some youth-serving organizations was the MFI's expectation that the youth-serving organizations who are helping youth increase their economic opportunities could be doing more to help young people build savings assets so that they could become viable clients that could graduate to being viable clients for them as an MFI. And as part of that, they were somewhat critical of the training and kind of BDS services that the youth-serving organizations, the NGOs, were offering, in feeling that these were not necessarily demand-driven, that they were not really helping youth to advance to what was their interest, which was becoming viable clients. So I'm interested to know, in your experiences, are you seeing examples of youth-serving organizations, and particularly sort of non-school youth-serving organizations, NGOs, community groups, for example, who are very deliberately and intentionally helping young people to build savings assets to be able to graduate them on to somewhat more sustainable programs? Thank you.
Let me respond to that, at least from our work in Uganda. So we worked with International Care Relief Uganda, and their focus, now they are called, the name just slipped my mind, Africa, I can't remember, but they've Build Africa. So their focus was is on youth, and they look at increasing the skills of youth in agriculture. They also look at HIV education. They look at building assets. so we introduced the savings and assets program in the organization, and so they've continued that. What they've done since we phased out the project is that the graduates from our program, they've been mobilized to have associations, and these are associations that build on the resources that they have within the association. So they will take seeds to a central bank and deposit those seeds. If they need the seeds in the next season, they can go and borrow. So there's a central place where the resources are deposited, and this there's an exchange within the community. And then they have linked these associations directly with World Food Program so that they cut out the middleman from exploiting these young farmers, so that they get as much profit as they can from their yield. So that's an example of an NGO that is trying to build skills for youth.
If I could interject a question for a moment, and then we'll turn to Jamie, I think was next in the queue. I want to get back to this question that Gina first put on the table, but was also picked up by Carolina and Ernest, about the kind of asset, and what effect that it has. And if I can just provide a little bit of commentary first, a little background, I think there's research that's showing that kids that grow up in houses that assets generally do better than those. What we don't know yet is whether or not savings accounts have the same sort of asset effect as assets in general do. And some of the literature is actually quite interesting. It turns out that sometimes you simply need an account, and ideally an account in the person's name, the child's name or the youth's name, that generates the asset effect. Sometimes it's savings that generates the effect, and sometimes it's an actual productive asset, that actually generates that outcome. And then there's other research that shows that if you, it doesn't really matter the amount of the asset, you get the same asset effect. There's research that Trina Williams summarized and was involved in, that when you vary the level of the asset, it doesn't change the asset effect. So even very small amounts of assets can generate a lot of hope, which is similar to the Shapiro research I cited earlier. Small amounts of assets at the right time can generate these. Now, I think certainly, part of what this project is going to do is try to unpack the asset effect a little better. What savings, what assets, what accounts predict asset outcomes or generate asset outcomes. I would welcome a chance to hear from any of the panelists if they can say a little bit more about this question of unpacking the asset effect. What kinds of assets generate what assets, asset outcomes. What do we know about that question so far?
I think there's quite a lot of evidence that having that especially net worth, quite a lot of sociological evidence across a lot of countries that especially net worth will affect many kinds of social and economic outcomes for households. When it comes down to savings accounts, the evidence a little more mixed. So liquid assets or savings accounts, but there's pretty strong evidence that liquid assets plays a strong role in educational achievement, especially college attendance and completion, some kind of liquid assets. We have pretty good evidence in the United States of strong association between just having an account, controlling for other factors. This study done by Willie Elliott at Pittsburgh and Sandy Beverly, University of Kansas, that just having an account in a child's name is likely to have positive effects on college attendance and completion. Controlling for the amounts of savings in the account and controlling for the amounts of other resources in the family. So there's evidence, and this is a very strong statistical effect, evidence that it's evidence of this psychological factor that you're talking about. So in general, assets really, if they operate in a positive way, it will be through a material effect. Resources are good to have. If you have some resources, then you can buy things including your college education, not have to drop out to work and do that kind of thing. But in addition, that we have this evidence that there is a psychological effect. Must be psychological because statistically it's operating above the material effect, right? It's not controlling for all of that. Still get the impact that's positive. And this has to be, or we would guess this has to be some, and we have other studies that begin to shine light on this, the psychological effect, which is that people do begin to think in the future. The way we think about this is that having some kinds of assets really gets people beyond the monthly consumption cycle. If you only have income and no other resources in your household, then money's coming in, but you're just thinking about how to get through the month until the next money comes in at the beginning of the next, wherever that's coming from employment or transfer or whatever the source. But assets enable people to psychologically get beyond that monthly cycle. And then they can think about, I have these resources, and even small amounts of resources in very poor households enable people to think very differently. Amounts of money that, especially in the developed world, we would think would be entirely insignificant in a developing country, people may view as a significant resource that helps them imagine that they have another possibility. They might be able to improve their business by buying a new pan to cook their cakes in. They might be able to, very small investments in people's lives enable them to think about making improvements that can over time improve their livelihoods and their long-term conditions. So I've learned doing this work over time never to be critical about amounts of savings until you actually figure out what that means to the person involved. Because the amount of money that we might spend taking a taxi from one side of town to the other, it might be in someone's life a critical investment that can help them improve their resources.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this panel a little earlier so we can move on to the next, but I want to get a show of hands of anybody who'd like to make a question or comment. I'm going to take these all together and then give the panelists each a chance to respond to whatever they can. So Jamie, would you like to start? And Lindsay, you'll have to move around the room pretty quickly here as the hands go up. So just wait till all the questions are out or comments, please.
Thanks. Okay, great. This is on. So we started the afternoon with Rita talking about the voice of youth and her experience traveling and speaking with youth in different developing countries, and just spent the last hour and a half thinking through some of the development possibilities for youth or individuals and families through financial assets. And I think about from this report and all the work that we've done together, all this great research that's happened already so far. Last night talking with Carolina at dinner about a recent visit to the ladies of the Puno Cusco Corridor project, and how when you're there and you see it, it's all of a sudden something clicks. If you didn't understand the meaning of assets for them before, now you know. And I think about Fred's work with, Fred Sewamala's work with orphans in Uganda and some of the stories coming out of that, or even I think last week a really inspiring talk by Margaret Sheridan in the book that she just published with others, Striving to Save, where she opened up her remarks telling the story of a couple of the savers from the SEED initiative here in the United States. And so I was just wondering if those on the panel, or even Margaret or Fred who are in the room, could briefly tell us a story, a personal story of, I don't know if there are complications to this because I know there are research issues, but telling us this, I think Margaret gave someone else a different name, but I really think that it could be very. I've always been inspired by that, and I wonder if we could hear more to really contextualize what it means for these people that now have savings accounts and these financial assets.
Great. Next hand. Thank you, Jamie.
Jimena Arteaga, microfinance independent consultant. I think my point goes to the whole panel. The research you're doing is great, and one of the benefits microfinance has provided to poor households is precisely that transformative effect by producing the loan at the time when the people need it. I think the major inflection point in the curve for growth in microfinance was when the institutions started moving from a mono product to a more demand-driven product. Now you mentioned, and the assumption I think was that this poor households, the people in the households, can produce some income. They didn't save really. They saved in sheep and so on. They didn't save in financial assets that much. But they could start saving eventually. That was part of the model. The assumption was that mainly they were in life. They were not heterogeneous. They were not that heterogeneous. They were homogeneous to some degree, and that they were not as much in transition. They had a family. They had to provide for their family. They had to provide for the children. They were more stable. Those are the two huge differences with youth, and those were mentioned by you. They are more heterogeneous. Youth is more heterogeneous, and also youth is always in transition, and those periods of transitions are much shorter. I hope the research, and maybe you will address this point later on, addresses that point from the practical perspective, like the gentleman asked before.
Thank you. Any last takers, last question or comment? Oh, Ronnie, from the front.
I wanted to drill a little bit deeper on a bit of a tension that I thought I heard in some of the speakers' perspectives. I think that we are all in agreement that assets, or the literature seems to indicate that assets have some kind of a psychological effect. Ray, I think you very aptly called it hope, for lack of a more better
hope
term.
In concrete form. Mm-hmm. That's
exactly.
Michael's word. That's Michael's term. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've also established, several speakers have said that financial assets might be more useful for protecting from shocks or taking advantage of opportunities because of the divisibility factor and because of the joker factor. And Dr. Ariete, you mentioned that income seems to matter for the holding of financial assets. At the same time, Dr. Sheridan's and others' work has shown that institutional arrangements also matter. And so I would love to hear from the wealth of experience represented on the panel, what seems to matter more? Is it income or is it institutional arrangements, and for youth in particular? And under what circumstances?
I think we better add an hour, Jamie. Just a brief comment on the second question. I think that the debt crisis combined with the savings revolution has really put on the table the whole theory of change. What do we lead with? Do we lead with credit? Do we lead with savings? Is it savings, then insurance, and then credit? I think it's a really good question that is very much on the table right now. Great. These were wonderful questions. I'm going to start with Ernest and then work my way back. And please, maybe pick one comment or question to respond to. Thanks.
Well, let me respond to this last very interesting question. I don't have any difficulty with any finding that institutions do matter. The institutions do matter, and indeed that is reflected in my own work also. But having said that, I don't want us to ignore the fact that we've always expected that with the kind of support we provide, whether as governments or as NGOs or as international organizations, that we would like to see incomes grow in these households. And as the incomes grow, we expect to see changes in their behavior. Very often we haven't paid enough attention, we haven't sort of stayed with households long enough to observe the changes in behavior as a result of changes in income flow to the households. And I'm quite happy that today we are beginning to spend more time through panel data sets to observe how those changes in behavior then can be observed. In the past, we sort of jumped to conclusions based on one observation that we've made at a particular point in time. Today, we are able to stay with households. I'm involved in a study that's going over 15 years. So able to observe a household go through these different changes, observing intra-household dynamics and allowing us to form views about how the changes within the household then impact on individual behavior as they move on with life. So it's not a simple matter of, at one point in time, does income matter more than institutions? But what are the dynamics taking place within households? How are these dynamics responding to various forms of support that we may provide from outside? And I believe that doing that, we may find that the way households relate to different institutions, the way households relate to different forms of support, and so on, probably much more interesting from a research point of view, and also from a policy point of view, than we have allowed ourselves to sort of to observe in the past.
Thank you. Carolina?
Okay. I was told by Michael to tell a story, but actually I have too many stories about savings accounts because I'm dealing with that every single day now. But I will just tell a very short one. Last week we had in Peru, in Cusco, the visit of the president of the Ford Foundation, and we want to really show him how this use of savings account was changing the life of rural women in the case of Peru. So we invite a group of women that were organized in a group just to receive the financial education, and they have been working as a group and saving with the support of a public sector project in Peru for the last 4 years. So they, instead of telling each of them her story, they decide to make a sociodrama. And the sociodrama was before and after savings. And the before section was the representation of how all these women, rural women, most of them extreme poor in Peru, at the beginning didn't trust the idea of going into the bank. For most of them was the first experience opening the door of a bank and talking to the guy in the other side of the window. And most of them had to do their first approach to the bank and to the project without the permission of the husband because they didn't trust the idea. And they represent very nicely these two major challenges: getting enough confidence to get into the bank and doing it behind the eyes of the husband. The second moment, saving, was they were very empowered to go into the bank and ask questions. One said that after a couple of years going into the bank, when the guy in the other side of the window didn't answer properly their questions, they were able to call the manager of the branch. And that was very impressive because they really were so empowered. And I think that's something that comes with the use of the account and with getting familiar to talk to these different people. And it was very impressive because the financial institution that works with them at the beginning didn't have anybody talking Quechua, which is the language that most women still use in the countryside. And after this experience of working with savings accounts, now everybody working in the countryside has the requirement that at least one person in each branch has to speak the native language. So that's the type of learning in both sides that we've seen. And then after, to end the story of this group of women of Piquillacta, they were talking about the future and the use of the savings account. And the most important feature that they were trying to express, it was their ability to plan new initiatives. And that makes what Michael was saying, the idea of future becomes into the present. And whatever you do in the present is to build a better future. And that has to do with this group being all women and all having children, and the life cycle matters, actually. But I think that could be easily translated to the young fellows. And so I think that's very powerful. And not related with the story about these women in Piquillacta, what I would like to go back to one question raised by Anita about the negative impacts. And I think that the good stuff about savings accounts is that the negative impacts are actually coming from outside the savings account use. For example, we cannot promote a saving account project in a place like Argentina where you have 25 inflation rate, a 25% inflation rate, because you lose your money if you leave it in the bank. It doesn't make any sense. Or in a country where you are charged every time you go into the bank, because that's completely awful. However, one thing that was that questioned us a lot in this project with savings accounts for rural women was transaction cost. How we are forcing these women to use a saving facility that is 8 hours far away from your place, and it's very costly to go. What we've learned from these rural women is that could be seen also as a benefit. Having your money so far away puts you the responsibility to really think if you really want to use your money for that purpose. And you have a long period of time between you get the decision of use your money and you actually get your money. So you have very, very, very long time to really consider if you're making the right decision. And women told us that as a benefit of the account. It's if you have it at home, you easily get rid of that. And if you have it in the bank, you have to really think about. So I would say that the negative impacts of using the savings account has to do with macroeconomic issues, interest rate, inflation rate, limitations, prohibition, cost charged to the user of the account. But has also a very nice thing. To begin a relationship with the financial system, it doesn't involve risk for you. It's pretty safe, different from credit. You always have your money available for you. Also, if you have this savings tied to a purpose, it's your money, and you can change your mind in the way out. And usually, it imposes very low cost to you. The only thing that keeps to be resolved is the opportunity cost of that money. Now, if you invested in cattle, for example, maybe you'll get more profits than in having it in the bank. Then the issue is, what are the other things you are getting from the bank, different from the interest rate you're getting and the security you're getting? So I think there's a very interesting balance in favor of savings accounts anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Gina?
I've been asked to tell a story as well. So I will tell a story of a youth male, I'll call him Richard. So we found Richard. Richard was orphaned at the age of 12, and he had to pull out of school because he had to take care of his siblings. And obviously he didn't have the wherewithal to send the kids to school and take care of them. And so when we were collecting data for the baseline, we found Richard in a very sad situation. And so he enrolled in the project, and like I explained earlier, all the assets within the project were productive assets. So we were responding to the issue of income and unemployment. So all the assets were productive assets. And so Richard managed to save, actually. He saved a bit and then multiplied that, went back, saved it, and we matched his savings 1-to-1, and he bought a motorcycle. And so these motorcycles, what are called bodabodas in Uganda, you use them for transporting other people and you pay a fee. And so Richard was able to use this motorcycle. He bought land. He managed to get married. By the time we were phasing out the project, he had a baby. And he had started planning. He was planning to open a warehouse where he would be selling sodas. And so by the time we were leaving, he had taken all his siblings back into school and was able to pay the school fees, buy uniforms, and buy books.
Great. Okay, Michael.
I have just a few comments. First, I'll take up Ronnie's good question about institutions versus income. I think it's a really important question. I'll just in the United States, we've had individual development account programs. I have very extensive data on long-term savings by a bunch of people in the IDA programs. We find a very weak relationship of income to savings amounts in individual development accounts, and we find that the lower income people are saving a higher percentage of their income. If we do statistical analyses of people's, as Ray was saying, people's individual characteristics, including their income, and we also enter program variables in there, such as amounts of financial education, match rates, or other characteristics of the savings program, we find that the savings program characteristics really explain a lot more of the variance. This is very consistent, I think, with findings, and this is in microfinance. The fundamental work's been done by Stuart Rutherford and also Marguerite Robinson and others, showing that very low-income people. I think there is, and with respect, all respect to Ernest, I think there is a demand for financial savings in very low-income households. The issue, in my understanding of the data, is that there aren't financial instruments that respond to this kinds of savings needs that low-income households have, and we probably would end up agreeing about this if we talked about it. In short, people in a given society don't face the same institutions. So it's kind of hard to describe this, but I mean, those of us who might be middle class face one set of financial institutions, and people who are very poor will face a different set of financial institutions. I'll give you a very good example from the Puno project in Peru. Women there. These are indigenous women. I imagine descendants of Incas, or it's been there for longer than Europeans have been there by far. Didn't have savings and didn't feel comfortable going into town and participating in the bank, entering the bank. And it wasn't their imagination that this bank wasn't there to serve them. The bank really wasn't there to serve them. They would be harassed for going into the bank. The police would take their money if they came in. They had all kinds of stories about. So you have people who are facing very different institutional environments. So this is not an analysis that would typically come out of economic thinking. You have to be a little bit sociological about the conditions that people are facing. So my view is largely institutional because of this. I think we haven't figured out how to get financial savings. Excuse me. They haven't figured out how to do it very well in most cases, although Stuart Rutherford and Marguerite Robinson in Indonesia, Stuart in Bangladesh have figured out a lot about how to do that. We still have a long way to go. A couple of other we could do storytelling, so I'll tell a couple more Peruvian stories. There was and Carolina doesn't talk about this much, but there are pretty clear gender effects of these savings in Peru. And the women, having the money 8 hours away has another kind of effect, which is the money is not in your house. And if the money's in your house, you're at risk of having your husband ask you where the money is. And if you resist that, you're at risk of sometimes violence. So I remember a very eloquent statement, actually in Quechua, but you didn't have to speak the language to understand what this woman was saying, that, we have this money now and we don't get hit. We control this money because it's not in the bedroom, and we don't get hit as much anymore. Very touching and powerful statements. And then I remember another story about this. This is a group story. This is also in Peru, but in a different project in the south at a different time. The Puno project, you call. And I remember we were setting, we're delightful. These projects are great. These women are so proud to be savers. They have this financial assets for the first time. If you're in this room, you will not have any doubt about this. I have to be a researcher, so I'll wait to collect the data. But as a person, I have no doubt about what's happening with these women. They will tell you. So a group of women sitting and we're meeting and talking about savings, and it was just, I think, just by happenstance this day, a gentleman comes in to offer a microinsurance product, and this is a microinsurance product that would insure for a small amount of money if they or their husbands became disabled and no longer all small farmers agriculture no longer able to work, which means that they would not have income, was a insurance for these kinds of hazard. I have never seen so many women immediately light up and turn their attention to what this man was saying. He was offering them protection, the kind of protection you're talking about. I was hoping you would use this example, but you avoided. Protection for their income stream in the future, and this was very important to them because this is hazardous work. People do get injured. People can be disabled for life, and when that happens, then your economic viability is there's no backup. So these women, for the first time, had a protection of their livelihood, and they just were like, they understood this. I mean, you didn't have to say it twice. They were on this, and they were just glued to what this man was saying, and they were able to do this because, one, they had some financial assets to purchase this insurance, and two, an institutional arrangement had reached them that was available to other people, but not to them before that moment.
Thank you very much. And just a clarifying comment, I don't want anybody to think that because income may not be a strong predictor of savings, that doesn't mean that income isn't important to overall financial well-being. We've always sold this idea and very much believe it's a complement, a neglected complement, to income support strategies. So I guess one of the lessons here is if you plan to end early, you'll end on time. I thought this was a great discussion, and please join me in thanking our panelists.